Hello there, and welcome to Dream Myths. The roses in her father's garden had always bloomed out of season, as if they were responding to a secret music only they could hear. Belle would watch them from her bedroom window in the merchant's house, their petals unfurling in defiance of the frost. Their crimson hearts pulsed against the gray monotony of the port city, a place where ships arrived laden with silk and spice, but never with magic. She was the youngest of 3 daughters, though youngest implied a certain childishness that had never suited her, while her sisters, Celeste and Marguerite, adorned themselves in whatever finery their father's fluctuating fortunes could provide. Belle adorned her mind with books. These were ancient texts that spoke of transformation, of metamorphosis, of a love that could transcend form. Her father, Maurice, had built his fortune on an intuitive understanding of human desire. He knew what people wanted, what they would pay for it, and how to make them want more. Yet, he never quite grasped the desires of his youngest daughter, which seemed to tend toward the ineffable, the impossible. She once told him, to see the place where the sky touched the earth. He had laughed, and not unkindly, bringing her an astrolabe from his next voyage. The brass instrument now sat on her windowsill, its polished surface catching the morning light on the very day that everything changed. An eerie sense of discovery had long been a silent companion to Belle. Within the old books she read, she often found hidden symbols and arcane drawings, tucked into the margins or beneath faded ink. They were repeating spirals, roses blooming under a crescent moon, and cryptic annotations in a forgotten tongue. These finds fueled her yearning for a world of wonder and the extraordinary, a world completely at odds with her mundane reality. She noticed that the out-of-season roses in her father's garden bore mysterious patterns that uncannily mirrored those she saw in her books. Each petal seemed to hold a secret, each thorn to guard a promise. She had no way of knowing that these very desires, nurtured by the whispers in her books, would lead her directly to a reality far beyond her imagination. The harbor bells tolled not in celebration, but in mourning. 3 times the bells rang out, and each peal was a sharp, painful beat, announcing that 3 of Maurice's ships had been lost in a violent storm. The vessels had carried away not just their cargo, but the entire, carefully constructed architecture of their comfortable life as well. That fateful evening, dinner was served in a silence so profound it was terrifying. The dining table, which had always been a stage for lively conversation and tales of far-flung journeys, was now a tomb of heavy silence, broken only by the distant tolling of the bells. With each clang, it felt as though an invisible blade was cutting away at Maurice's long-held confidence. He tried to maintain a composed facade, but his hands trembled as they gripped his wine glass, as if he were trying to hold on to the last remaining fragments of a life that was about to shatter. "We will have to sell the house," Maurice announced, his voice a flat, emotionless monotone. Though his hands shook, his words were chillingly certain. "There's a small cottage, my mother's old place, a 3-day journey from here. We'll manage." Celeste buried her face in a napkin, sobbing as her grief washed over the brutal truth. Marguerite, the elder sister, raged at the injustice of it all. They worried about what their friends would say, about how they would be ruined. But Belle felt something else entirely. It was a curious lightness, as if a burden she hadn't known she was carrying had suddenly lifted. For the first time, she felt a strange sense of freedom. The small cottage lay at the edge of a forest, a wood so ancient its trees seemed to remember when the world was young. The house itself was modest, with just 4 rooms and a kitchen garden, but it was enveloped in wild roses that climbed the walls with an obsessive, passionate fervor. Belle fell in love with it instantly. This wasn't a downgrade. It was a transformation. She was no longer a wealthy merchant's daughter, but part of a wilder story, one where roses bloomed without the permission of man. Their first winter was a harsh redefinition of existence. Each day was a lesson in endurance, in how to survive with nothing but the barest necessities. They learned to milk the cow, a task that required patience and strength. They learned to coax vegetables from the grudging soil, digging through the rock-hard ground for sustenance. They learned to mend their own clothes, stitching each rip and tear not for fashion, but for warmth and survival. Belle's hands, once soft from turning the pages of books, grew calloused. Her fingers, once used to nothing but paper and ink, were now rough and chapped, a testament to work and labor. But in the evenings, when the fire crackled and the wind sang through the eaves, she would return to the books she had saved. She would read to her father, and in those moments, they were rich again, not with coin or with comfort, but with a wealth that mattered more. It was the wealth of a shared moment, of a story told, of a soul nourished. In that little cottage, they found a kind of abundance they had never known in their grand city house. It was an abundance found in simplicity, in each other's presence, and in old stories or a reversal of fortune that felt like a dream. One of Maurice's ships, a vessel they had long buried in their grief, had returned to port with its cargo intact. He would have to travel back to the city to settle affairs, a journey that would take at least a week. On the eve of his departure, he asked his daughters, "What should I bring you?" It was a ritual question, a vestige of their old life he clung to. Celeste, with a touch of bluntness, said, "A dress of moonlight and pearls." Marguerite, with her characteristic arrogance, said, "A necklace of stars." When he turned to Belle, she simply kissed his cheek. "Just come home safely, Papa. But if you see a rose more beautiful than any in our garden, perhaps you might bring it to me." He smiled at the simplicity of her request, unaware that simple desires are often the most dangerous. On his way, Maurice encountered a strange beggar woman. She had eyes that seemed to see right through him, and she spoke a warning. "Be careful, son. What belongs to beauty often comes with a price. Cherish what is simple and stay away from what glitters." Maurice dismissed her words as mere superstition, yet the woman's warning clung to him, a faint, unheard echo. Maurice's journey to the city proved to be for naught. He was caught in a tangle of legal complications, creditors with prior claims, and bureaucratic red tape. He left with barely enough money for the trip home, a heavy disappointment weighing on his heart. The late spring storm hit as he crossed the forest at night, turning the familiar road into a labyrinth of shadows and wet branches that clawed at his cloak like desperate fingers. He had stumbled onto a path he never knew existed, a path that led to a completely different world. Maurice's horse, usually a placid and reliable creature, grew suddenly restless, its hooves uneasy as they went deeper into the forest. The trees here were different. They were older, darker, their trunks twisted like tortured demons, their branches like desperate arms, forming shapes that suggested frozen screams. This was not a forest of the world, but a domain of the forgotten, a place of despair. And then, between one flash of lightning and the next, he saw it, a castle that had no business existing. Its spires reached for the storm-torn sky like desperate fingers. The gate stood wide open, as if the castle had been waiting for him specifically. his horse passed through without hesitation, and Maurice found himself in a courtyard where no rain fell, a sanctuary that was utterly unnatural. The castle door swung open on its own as he approached. Inside, hovering candles gave off a warm light, and a fire crackled in a hearth large enough to roast an ox. A table had been set for one, laden with food that steamed as if freshly prepared. Maurice had a strange sense that he was following a preordained path. The hovering candles were not merely sources of light. They seemed to be guiding him. The table laden with food felt less like hospitality and more like a gilded cage. The prepared bedroom was not a sanctuary, but an exquisitely crafted box designed to trap a mouse. When he awoke from a short sleep, his clothes had been dried and mended, and his horse was waiting in the courtyard, saddled and fed. And there, growing along the eastern wall of the castle, was a rose garden of such beauty that it stopped his heart. He reached out and plucked one from its stem. Instantly, the world changed. The warmth of the castle turned to ice. The light dimmed to twilight, and before him, a massive fur-covered figure with tusks that curved from a jaw too large for any natural creature. But the eyes were human, as blue as a winter sky and filled with such rage that Maurice fell to his knees. "Thief," the beast said, and his voice was not merely thunder and avalanche, but the death of hope itself. The beast asked, "Do you know what you have stolen?" "That rose bloomed on the day a witch cursed me for my cruelty, for my inability to see beauty in anything but the surface. One rose for each year of my curse. You have stolen my time." The beast gave him a choice, one that was as cruel as it was ironic. "You will either return here to die for your crime, or send me the daughter who desired this rose. Let her learn the price of careless wishes." Belle knew something was wrong the moment she saw her father's horse appear on the crest of the hill. The familiar animal came home without the usual traveler's fanfare, and Maurice was slumped in the saddle, having aged a decade in a week. When she ran to him and helped him inside, the change in his face was a silent, gut-wrenching testament to an unspeakable pain. She saw the rose in his saddlebag, an impossibly perfect bloom, a strange and vibrant crimson. In an instant, she knew that this flower had cost more than gold. It had been bought with something priceless. That night, after Celeste and Marguerite had gone to bed, Maurice told her everything. He wept as he spoke. This man who had faced financial ruin with dry eyes but who was now undone by a magical curse. "I will go back," he said, his voice laced with a raw despair. "I have lived my life. I've seen you grow up. I can face whatever comes." "No," Belle said, and her voice was steady as stone, in unyielding resolve. "I asked for the rose. The choice is mine." She challenged his logic, asking, "Is he truly a monster who gave you food and shelter, who let you go when he could have killed you instantly, who tends an impossible rose garden?" Belle smiled sadly and with certainty, adding, "I've read enough stories to know that monsters are often more than they appear." She left that night while her father slept. The horse knew the way. The castle stood waiting in the pre-dawn light, more beautiful than terrible now. Belle was terrified on the journey. The shadows and sounds of the ancient forest were a constant reminder of the unknown that awaited her. But each time she looked at the rose in her hand, the memory of her books and her longing for a different world came rushing back, solidifying her resolve. The rose was not just a debt, it was a promise, a bridge between the mundane world and the magical one she had always craved. When the beast stood waiting in the courtyard, Belle had prepared herself for horror. Yet, she was struck by the beast's stillness and the way he held himself as if afraid his very existence might cause harm. "You came," the beast said, and his voice held a hint of surprise, the delicate surprise of one long forgotten. "I came," she agreed. "I am Belle. You have my father's rose, and I have come to pay his debt." "You would die for a flower?" the beast asked. "You would kill for a flower?" Belle simply met his gaze with unshakable resolve. "I will not kill you," the beast said, "but you must stay here forever. That is the price." "Then I accept," Belle said. She was ready to step into a new world, one that might be hell, but might also be a kind of heaven. Based on the provided outline, here is a detailed and engaging version of the text, written in the style of a senior content writer. Chapter 7, The Quiet, where love blossomed amidst the impossible. The castle was alive. It was a breathing entity, a mysterious being that responded to Belle's presence. Doors swung open for her as she approached. Fires flared to life and danced as she entered a cold room. The books, her greatest treasures, suddenly appeared on library shelves, as if they had been waiting for her. The beast explained that the castle responded to need and want, to said, a raw, primal demand. Want, she continued, is what makes life worth living, what lifts a soul beyond mere existence. Aren't you afraid of me? The beast asked, and it was a question filled with a genuine vulnerability and surprise. Belle replied, perhaps everyone else lacks imagination. It was a retort that was both honest and implied that she saw something deeper than his monstrous exterior. They began to spend time together. She explored the castle, a labyrinth of wonders and secrets, and she read to the beast through stories of kings and heroes. They came to understand each other. When Belle was near, the castle's frozen layer began to thaw. It wasn't just a change in temperature, but a change in its very nature. The hovering candles burned brighter, the doors opened faster, and soft, lyrical melodies began to drift from the empty halls. Even the stone statues seemed to come alive, their rigid lines softening in the warm light. The castle was responding to the presence of love and kindness, as if it had been waiting for this life for centuries. Belle told the beast, I've been running my whole life without moving, running from the unexpected, the normal, the safe. She admitted that she had pretended to be content with a mundane life, but here, in his castle, nothing is expected or normal or safe. She no longer had to pretend to be satisfied with anything less than magic. She found that the roses in his garden held his memories. By touching them, she saw Prince Adam in his cruel past, but she also saw his loneliness, his desperate yearning to be loved. Your past doesn't disgust me, she said. It makes me sad for the boy who was taught that beauty was power. Belle continued, we are both cursed. You to be a monster on the outside, and I on the inside, never content with the normal, always craving the impossible. The beast replied, and it was the first time he had ever shown genuine, unbridled awe. Brave, extraordinary, Belle dreamed her father was sick. In her dream, he called her name in a weak voice, like a whisper of wind through dry leaves. When she woke, anxiety gnawed at her, a dread more terrifying than any monster she had ever imagined. She found the beast and pleaded, I must see him. I cannot bear to know he is suffering. The beast offered her a magic mirror. Look, he said, his voice low and heavy, no longer a growl but a sound of profound sadness. The mirror revealed her father, Morris, thin and frail in his bed, with her sisters sobbing at his side. was the terror of facing eternal loneliness once more. That single moment changed everything. His sadness connected with her pain, strengthening her resolve to return. "I will come back," she promised. "I have been happier here with you than anywhere in the world." It was not a lie, but a deep truth she had discovered. The beast gave her the mirror and said, "7 days. After that, I will know that even impossible roses cannot bloom forever." Belle returned home, and everything seemed so small and mundane after her time in the castle. The tiny cottage, the shallow conversations of her sisters, and the mediocrity of country life. All of it paled in comparison to the grandeur and magic of the castle. She didn't dare look into the mirror, afraid that she would see the beast waiting and that the sorrow in his eyes would haunt her. On the 5th day, the anxiety became too great. She decided to look. What she saw made her heart stop. The beast lay in the rose garden, still as death, with the roses withering around him. He was dying. She immediately raced back to the castle, where an early winter had come and the roses were dying. She found the beast, half buried in the dead petals. "Beast," she cried, her vision blurred by tears. "Please, I came back. I chose to come back." "Why?" he asked, his voice a faint whisper. "Because I love you," she said, and it was the truth she had found. Not in spite of who you are, but because of who you are. A blinding stream of light erupted from the beast's form, bright as the birth of stars. It wasn't a violent explosion, but a liberation, a moment of pure transparency, as light that had been imprisoned for decades was finally set free. When the light subsided, Belle opened her eyes, and the beast was gone. Instead, an almost perfectly beautiful man lay in her arms. He was handsome, but not cruel. His beauty softened by something that had never been there before. Humanity. Belle didn't recognize him immediately. She looked around in a daze, searching for the beast. "Where is he? Where is the beast?" she asked, her voice filled with a desperate anxiety, as if she had just lost a loved one. Only when Adam spoke, his voice still echoing the beast's courage and sincerity, did she accept the reality. "It's still me," he said, his voice gentle and full of truth. "The curse changed my outside, but you changed what was within," he continued. "I am not the person I once was. I cannot be that. I do not want to be that." Belle touched his face, her fingers tracing his softened features. Then, be both, she said, and it was an incredible proposition. Be the prince who learned to be a beast, who learned to be human. Be impossible like your roses. He laughed, and it was still thunder, still distance and delight combined. But it was tamed now, no longer frightening. The roses around them began to bloom again, but in a different way, in spirals and fractals. They weren't ordinary roses, but flowers of transformation, representing a new world created by their love. The castle shimmered and settled into new configurations. It was no longer a prison or a paradise, but something in between, something chosen. Stay with me, Adam said. It wasn't a command or a plea, but an invitation, one that was equal and genuine. Because we match, both of us caught between forms, between worlds, between what is and what could be. They kissed in the garden where memories had become roses and roses had become promises. And if there was a magic in it, it wasn't a fairy tale magic, but the ordinary magic of two people choosing each other despite or because of their transformations. The story doesn't end with a fairy tale wedding. Instead, it concludes with a quiet and beautiful moment. Belle and Adam are in the rose garden, holding hands. They are no longer a prince and a beast. They are Belle and Adam, people who have found each other in the impossible. The rain and thunder from the story's beginning return, but they are no longer sounds of mourning or terror, but a peaceful backdrop, harmony